I'm Mark, and this is the Mr. Productivity Podcast, the podcast to help solopreneurs banish overwhelm, reduce stress, and get more done. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking with the founder of Cagr Investments, LaSean Smith, who just loves solopreneurs. Now, before we dive into today's show, I want to invite you to sign up for the free 21-day productivity challenge. As a solopreneur, you've got a lot to do, and this challenge will help you be more productive at it. Invest 1 minute in reading one tip every day for 21 days, and it will transform your productivity habits in less than 1 month. To sign up for free, head on over to MrProductivity.com/challenge. Remember, Mr. is all spelled out, M-I-S-T-E-R, MrProductivity.com/challenge, or click the link in the show notes. Now, on with the show. LaSean, welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing, Mark? Great to catch up.
I am doing fantastic. And I'll tell you, one of the reasons why LaSean is on the show, listener, is when he first reached out to me, he said, I love solopreneurs. And as you know, as a listener of the podcast, this is all about solopreneurs and being productive and living their best life. So if you are a solopreneur, you're in for a treat today, because I've already talked to LaSean before this interview, and I know he's on fire, and he truly does love solopreneurs. Because as we were talking before I pressed record, LaSean, I think a lot of people were solopreneurs, but we had a lot of people join us during this pandemic we recently had.
Yeah, 100%. And some folks have done it intentionally with the right kind of process and approach, and others have kind of like dove right in. And so I think one of the things we can touch on today is for folks who maybe are looking for more structure, or people who are just making sure they're finding the right balance of enjoying the work and, kind of doing meaningful work as they kind of kick off their solopreneur journey, or veterans like yourself. What are some of the tactics, things that are top of mind, or, we're always learning. Maybe there's something I've learned, you've learned recently. I'd love to just kind of dive in, kind of the journey on how do you stay ready. And the two things I like to balance, and maybe these are competing sometimes on purpose, it's like, I want to stay happy. I want free cash flow. And almost everything else is noise. I don't care about the status, the prestige. None of those other things really matter to me. And I think folks there, if they don't have those pillars, that's okay. But they need to be intentional and say, why am I doing this? What do I want to get along this journey as a solopreneur?
I became a solopreneur back in July 2005 when my corporation that I was working for at the time said, you're fired, you're out of here. And I'll be honest with you, LaSean, when I first started that journey, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, private yachts, private planes. It doesn't happen that way, because when you work for yourself, you are everything. You are the president, the CEO, the marketer, sales, janitor, the doorman, you're everything. And you have to work really hard. Now, we have the freedom. So, for example, I am a huge European football fan. If my team's on during the day, I watch the game during the day live. But I also work 7 days a week, not because I have to, but because I want to use the word you just used. I'm happy. I'm really happy doing what I want to do. And I know it's cliche, but what I believe, when you're doing what you love to do, it's not really work. I know it's a very overused cliche, but it really suits me because I really love what I do.
100%. Yes. And I think some folks, the grass is greener kind of cliche, they're running from something. And so solopreneurship can be the thing that helps them take control of their situation, but they still need a plan. And so, I've told folks that I've coached in the past, you can be a bad manager to yourself as a solopreneur. So you have to work on that as well.
100%, because what happens is, when you are your own boss, there's no one holding you accountable unless you join an accountability group or you hire an accountability coach. You're on your own. And I learned really quickly I needed help. I needed a coach that would call me out on my BS and say, hey, what are you working on today? Oh, that's what you worked on?
Exactly.
Well, that's not moving the needle. So I encourage everyone listening to this interview that if you're going to go on your own, or if you are on your own, you need someone, not a friend, not a spouse. You need to invest some money into someone who's going to hold you accountable, because everybody can hold us accountable when things are going well and you're doing everything you say. That's easy. But when you have to get up into someone's grill, again, this is going to be a show of cliche, I've got a feeling. When you get up in someone's grill, then they're like, you can't, it's hard to do that if you love that person, if they're a relative or they're a friend. So I think I can't overemphasize the need to go pay somebody to hold you accountable.
I love frameworks, and so I'll drop one here. There's a framework called the Personal Board of Directors. And for folks who are not familiar with the concept, this is not something I invented, but I've kind of implemented a very simple version of this. And I always like frameworks that you can strip down to their essence, because it's just easier for us to kind of comply with them when we can keep them in their head and they're not all convoluted and complex. But the big beats on this is that you are going to find 2 to 3 people in 4 specific groups. The first are advocates. These are connectors, people who open doors, influencers, sponsors. Very important that a sponsor is typically someone who is using their social capital to vouch for you. So it's always interesting if someone reaches out to me on LinkedIn that I never have interacted with, maybe never even met, and they say, "Hey, LaSean, could you connect me with this?" Or I have this customer that I'm trying to contact over here at this company. Could you introduce me? And, they kind of haven't put the work in for me to actually use my social capital. So people really need to understand that role of sponsor. But that first pillar, advocates, is important. Then you have your developers. These are your coaches, mentors, teachers, advisors, folks you were just talking about. Then there are the innovators. These are the people you kind of dream with, right? These are disruptors, people helping you think out of the box. What could you tackle? And then there are the supporters. These are cheerleaders, energy lifters, family, friends, peers. And to your point, it's okay for us to have some of those family members as our cheerleaders, but they kind of have their own lane as supporters. And the more we kind of decouple these roles, have people in their own kind of position, I found them more productive. And then finally, if you take this type of concept seriously, I actually have folks take a 90-day, quarterly calendar and say every one of the folks on your personal board of directors, these 2 to 3 times 4. So that's going to be, quite a few folks. You're going to have a 25, 30-minute meeting with them every 90 days. And anyone who doesn't have some shape of that, I would say there's an opportunity for them to have a more resilient board of directors. And the outcome is just what you said. It's going to provide that accountability, that spark, all of the energy that kind of helps you maintain your momentum when you're working as a business of one.
I think people who are not solopreneurs, they don't speak our language. In other words, it's really tough for someone who works in the corporate environment in whatever role to understand what a solopreneur does. And I think that's where the personal board of directors comes in, because yes, you do need people to cheer you on, but you also need people to say, all right, what are your goals for this 90 days? All right, you're going to do, this is your goal. What are you going to do the 3 months? What are you going to do every week? What are you going to do every day? Maybe get really granular. And what are you going to do every hour? And then at the end of 90 days, you can look at that sheet and go, oh boy, I didn't do nearly what I was supposed to do, because this is where the power of accountability is. We come up with these goals, but if we're not ever going to meet with someone, if no one's ever going to hold us accountable, it's really difficult to stay on track. Now, your friends will say, golly gee, LaSean, I'm sure you gave it the old college try. That's like the 5th cliche we use today. But that's the problem with having only cheerleaders, because you did say cheerleaders are part of the pillars, but only a part. It's not all 4 pillars. And so that's why you need to have people that are going to here's another one, hold your feet to the fire. How many cliches can we fit into this show
we'll
today,
have like
LaSean?
a little, we'll get a top 10 here. Yeah, one of the things that you said there that made me think about something that's very important as a solopreneur, as you kind of kick off your journey, you can sometimes get so heads down focused on delivery that you're not thinking about kind of outreach and relationship building. I call them relationship moats. It's not, I actually don't use the word networking. It's not just about, all right, can I connect to this person? You have to build and foster those relationships. But the edict that I've used for myself, and it's proved very helpful, is simple: meet strangers. And the more you can get out of your comfort zone, if that's something that causes you anxiety or what have you, I found that to be a very important part of this, because just tying it back to the previous point, some folks may say, well, I don't know anybody who does XYZ who can be my coach or my connector or any of these different roles. And through degrees of separations, there is someone amazing out there that you can bring onto your personal board of directors but you have to go put in the work to go out and meet these folks. And when you're kind of working alone, it's easy to just kind of sequester yourself and kind of almost pull yourself out. And I've just found that to be the kiss of death for business because, again, one, you don't have the right social structure around you, but also not as many folks understand why you're valuable. And the more people understand your talent stack, your service offering, your products, that's just going to make your business a lot easier. And so this idea of meeting strangers, whether it's formal groups or grocery stores or local events, we all have different personalities, different values on where we want to hang out. But your ability to, I say, if you're not meeting someone new every week at a minimum, you may not be maximizing your potential. Now, again, these are all things we're talking about that are parts of the toolkit. There's not one way or the highway. There's another cliche. But what I find valuable is folks who can really kind of internalize this concept and they can keep expanding the number of people who kind of know what they care about, what they offer. And that just provides a really powerful compounding effect.
Do you feel that people don't get you? Because when I explain to them I'm a solopreneur, they kind of look at me and cock their head like a dog when they hear a high-pitched sound. They know what an entrepreneur is, sort of. And I tell them, okay, solopreneur is like an entrepreneur, but I work by myself, thus the name solo. But they don't understand. So you work for yourself, and what do you do? And whenever people ask me this, the image I get is from the book, The 4-Hour Workweek with Tim Ferriss. He said he just started telling people he's a drug dealer because it's so much easier to try to explain to people what he actually did. So when you tell people what you do they understand it or they kind of look confused?
They definitely look confused. And that's projection, I think, to a large degree, where someone is thinking about themselves. And I'm not generalizing all folks, but to your point, I think when I get the most extreme reactions, it's someone who has allowed themselves to become a cog in the wheel of some engine. And so in their brain, they think of their role, and then they think of the support structure around them, and they just can't visualize how there can be a fulfilling professional path for someone who isn't in that type of system. And that is, I think, the biggest unlock for me. And, I call myself a corporate refugee. I worked in, massive big companies. And so I have a good handle on what it's like to work there. And, I don't look at it all as thumbs down. I hated those experiences. I had a fantastic time. I kind of knew when it was time for me to do something different and get back to my roots, working small, as I like to say. And I've tried to kind of get rid of the bad habits, thinking everything has to be synchronous meetings or, other bureaucratic decision-making processes that you don't need to have when it's just yourself. But the flip side of that is to, I had to kind of get back in shape once I jumped back into the solopreneurship field, because what was broken was I was like, all right, I'm going to do a little marketing for 30 minutes. I'm going to do a little delivery for an hour. And I was doing all this context switching. And I realized I didn't have a system that was going to lean itself to working by myself. And so I had to reboot how I allocated my time and to make sure I was focusing on what was going to move that needle versus, sometimes the internal politics or the inertia of working in a large organization.
What are some of the mistakes that you made along the way as a solopreneur? Now, we've already talked about two of mine. I didn't think I needed accountability, and I really thought there would be instant success. I still don't have the so-called instant success, and here we're coming on almost on 20 years. I'm not rich like Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk, so depends on how you, of course, define success. But every day is an experience. Every day is a new piece of the puzzle, if you will. So what are some of the mistakes you have encountered when you left the corporate world and began your solopreneurship journey?
Yeah, well, I'll hit one kind of strategic piece and one tactical. The strategic piece was, and this continues to be my struggle, is I have shiny object syndrome.
Me too.
And once folks know that you're in command of your calendar, you get all sorts of opportunities. And part of why I enjoy what I do is I do get all this variety. And so that's fantastic. I'm not trying to kind of pare that down to zero, but I really have to focus on finishing projects. And there's all sorts of ways to be a solopreneur. Some folks are in professional services. They may do coaching or other things. Maybe they have a vocational or credentialed service. Maybe they're a CPA of one or something like that. Other folks may have an information product, something that they sell. My personal background come from the software world. And I started coding very young, but software has evolved into this thing where really large teams come together to build software. And I have rediscovered kind of the joy and freedom of building small software now as a solo developer. And one of the things that is dangerous is all the news, AI this, or, some new opportunity over here, or a friend has a real estate company and they need this custom application to go do this thing. Like, all of it is on the table. And so I really have to force myself to scope things properly, stay the course, and finish. And so I think that's one of the things that I struggled with. And when I left corporate America, it was more acute because I was still working on the side, doing small projects, while I was working in corporate America. But I always had the base of my job to kind of bring me back to focus. And so there's also a little tactics that I use to go keep that in check. But that's kind of the biggest challenge I have on the kind of strategic side, is not having the long enough term view. And when you don't have that, you don't compound to success properly. And so we all can benefit, I think, from thinking. And sometimes people say decades, not years or months. And then
Well, before we get to the second point, what I always tell people is it could be a hidden form of procrastination. So, for example, I use Grant Cardone's 10X Planner because I like how it's laid out with the planner, and it's got a place for your goals in the beginning of the day and the end of the day and your targets and successes. But I say, don't go looking for the perfect planner. Maybe you just need to get a notebook you have laying around the house, because going for the alleged perfect app, which doesn't exist, or the perfect planner, which doesn't exist, it's procrastination. I too, and I think anybody who's really honest and they're a solopreneur, they suffer from shiny object syndrome, because you're like, oh, this is the app that's going to make me $1 billion. This is the app that's going to do X, Y, and Z. And then oh my gosh, it's a huge learning curve. And it's like you didn't factor that into it. And meanwhile, you're down all these rabbit holes. So I just want to let you know that you and me and so many people listening to the show today are in the same boat as we go down these rabbit trails. Then we stop and like, what am I doing? And then we have to go back to the main trail to continue on our journey.
Yeah. And just working off of that, one of the beliefs that I've taken from corporate America that this is a lesson I've learned on other people's dime. So that's always great to kind of get a scholarship. But many times I worked on projects that didn't work, they failed projects that technically were very sophisticated. We built what we set out to build, but there's no demand. And in today's world, especially if you are small, I actually believe you should go.
Are you one of the million? Join over 1 million people, which may be a slight hyperbole, and get productivity tips that will help you live a more productive life. Head on over to MrProductivity.com/insider.
Build the demand first. And that's something that people don't always, and I'm not saying this is the only way, but I find that this is a much easier way to kind of think about how to deliver your value. So finding your target audience, or I just collect the simple words, go find your people, and then build a relationship with them and figure out their pain point, and then identify what you're going to build and deliver. And that's a get rich slow type model that for a lot of folks who are in a rush and they want to predictably get rich, that's what they're tackling. And that's just not a thing. Predictably getting rich fast is not a thing. There's
unless Mark Zuckerberg sends you some money or something like that.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen.
That's the lottery though, right?
So, exactly. But listen, I did the same thing. When I created my course, I did it backwards. I put the cart in front of the horse. I created this course and no one said they wanted it. And so guess what? It didn't sell. Because I did not go find my people and find out what their pain points was. I'm like, well, hey, I'm Mr. Productivity. I created this course. Nothing. So I want people to understand what you just said. You need, my friends do it all the time. Oh, I created this new course. I said, did you sell it in beta? Like, what do you mean sell it in beta? Well, let's say you're going to sell the course for $997. You say, hey, listen, I'm going to sell this course for $997. I haven't built it yet, but if you pay now, you'll get it for $497. How many people pull out their credit cards? And they're like, well, why would I do that? Because you're establishing demand. Because if no one wants it, you don't have to build the course. I did not know this in the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, this is the magic. And again, we've both been on this journey. It feels great to just go build something. And that, for some folks is the fun part. And the idea of this nebulous, ambiguous path of building an audience, actually getting your demand, even if it's online, which is a lot simpler than it used to be 10, 20 years ago, there is work to do to, not only figure out who your people are, but to provide them enough value so you can build that trust. So they say, hey, Mark's the person who's going to go take me on this path and unlock this next skill set or this next part of my experience. And that, I think, is an area where folks, again, they go back to some of these poor behaviors like procrastination. I used to have this thing that, and every once in a while, I say I used to, some of these things I still struggle with, but I've kind of got them under control, coping mechanisms, where if I didn't want to do thing X, I would go watch a quote unquote productive YouTube video or read an article or something where I'm telling myself, well, no, this is work. And it was really just me procrastinating from doing the thing I knew I had to do. And typically it's go get more customers. There's this great quote from Peter Drucker, kind of the father of management consulting. And he says, listen, the purpose of business is to create a customer. And so as a result, there's only two functions: make the thing, sell the thing. Yep. And it's really easy to get kind of lost in one of those, but our jobs as solopreneurs is to do both.
Yeah, I appreciate your honesty, by the way. It's so refreshing to have someone say, hey, listen, I still go down those rabbit trails. Now, I want to make sure we don't disconnect, because if they're a listener like me, they said you had 2 points, you shared the tactical. Now, I want to make sure we go back to that before we go too much further and then we both forget about it.
Yeah, so we were talking about the kind of things I've learned. That first one was the shiny object syndrome. The second is context switching. And so what I found was I was allowing myself, when I worked at a big company, to have these like hyper time slice days where meeting overload was impacting my productivity in general. And the company's just kind of absorbing that inefficiency. And so what I had to do is establish my weekly cadence. And I'm very diligent about this. There's a lot of things I give myself permission to change quite often. This is not one of them. And so I have kind of a 5-pillar allocation. And first one is consumption. So I allow myself time to consume various sources. That might be a book, that might be a YouTube video, what have you. But it gets its own calendar bucket. Time to connect with others. Time for me to create, time for me to deliver whatever it is that I'm working on, and all the yucky stuff, the administrative things that I don't really love to do. I call that support. And so I actually have an allocation: 20% on consumption, 10% on connecting, 20% on creating, 40% on delivery, and 10% on support. And really, the combination of connect and create is kind of my sales and marketing motion. And that those percentages are going to be different for different people, their personalities, the business and product or service they're into. But what I found is, if you can identify your buckets, then since you're in command of your calendar, you can reduce some of the context switching. And so, for instance, I only do recurring meetings on Tuesday. And anytime there is a meeting that, someone proposes that should be recurring, I want to challenge, why do we need a meeting in the first place? If we need the meeting, let's have it. But as soon as someone says, hey, this should be recurring, it's on Tuesday or it doesn't happen. And it's like, well, it looks like you're booked up on Tuesday. Well, it's going to be next Tuesday. And I found that sticking to that flow, at least for me, has been very helpful in me maintaining my inertia, because once I have inertia working on a task or a process, I'm pretty good. But getting that, kind of imagine a spark plug in an engine of a car. Like, I need that catalyst to spark to get started. And the more I switch contexts, the more I introduce opportunities for me to procrastinate. And so this kind of slicing has been very helpful for me to stay the course and not give myself an excuse to go down a path that's, not really what is on task for today.
Yeah, I love that, because I do some of what you've already talked about. So Tuesdays are interview days. We're recording this on Tuesday, May 23rd, and the interviews drop on Mondays, but Mondays are not interview days. Tuesdays are interview days. And I also do pre-interview calls for the screen guests on Tuesdays. So I know Tuesdays are allocated to podcast. Right. Now, my work schedule is a little bit different than most people. So my wife's weekends are Sundays and Mondays. Mm-hmm. So my weekends are Sundays and Mondays. So I work Tuesday to Saturday, but Tuesdays are podcasting days. And what I've been doing as the time goes on, I've been saying, okay, these are going to be coaching days. These are going to be connecting days. And I think that's really important to put those buckets in there, because I know I don't have to worry about Thursday. Oh, I don't have a podcast interview today, unless I'm on someone else's show, because it's not Tuesday. And I know some people will do a whole month worth of interviews on one day. I tried that. It doesn't work for me. It's too much work. So I do interviews on Tuesdays. Then I have a whole week to process them and get them out on Monday. That turns out to be a good flow. But I love your buckets of consumption, connection, creation, delivering. And I love your phrase, yucky stuff, because it is yucky stuff. It is. We all have to do admin work unless you're fortunate to have a staff. Then you wouldn't be a solopreneur. Right. So we all have to do the yucky stuff. I hate doing the yucky stuff. Matter of fact, recently it was a Monday morning and I wake up at 5:00 every morning and then I have to push out my podcast that day, on LinkedIn and whatnot. And so I went to my blog and it was gone. And of course you get those shivers down your spine, your knee, the hair stands up and you're like, what's going on? And what happened was I just went to a new theme on WordPress called Divi, one of the hottest themes out there. And there was one little setting that was off. And I don't remember removing it, but somehow it got removed. And I got on VIP support with Divi and they go, oh yeah, we fixed it. Whew. So that is yucky stuff.
Right.
Let me tell you something.
Exactly.
But before we wrap up today, I want to go back to something you said at the very, very beginning. You said happy and free cash flow. What does happiness mean to LaSean?
Yeah, there's a great quote from Naval Ravikant. He's kind of entrepreneur turned philosopher, I guess. And he's really just repackaging a lot of old kind of sayings and ideals in a newer form. But he says that retirement isn't really a thing for most driven people. Mm-hmm. What retirement is or whatever you want to call that notion, is the idea that every day you get up and you do work that is just for the day. You're not doing it in service of some future payoff. The work you do today is, and whatever you get out of that is enough. And for me, happiness is trying to get as close to that as possible. And again, I'm always breaking the streak, right? I'm like, oh, I have this new idea. And then one day, but I've almost gamified it. And so the idea that staying happy is about me really enjoying the moment. There's a psychologist who talks about two types of happiness. There's remembered happiness and experienced happiness. And remembered happiness, anyone who has children or other family members, it's when you go through something that has, kind of hard times in the moment, but when you look back at it very fondly. And so if you talk to someone about, raising young infants, they don't really retain the pain of the lossless, sleepless nights and all those things. They look at the good parts. And so they are remembering a situation largely as happy. So that's remembered happiness. The experienced happiness is right in the moment you feel it, right? And so there's no one crying at 3 a.m. Like right then you feel happy. And as I've gotten older, what I've tried to prioritize is making sure the day is enough and making sure I'm having as much experienced happiness as I go along. And my checks and balances, the reason I said free cash flow for solopreneurs who are only building for themselves or maybe building something that they might sell in the future, there's all sorts of ways that you can kind of count your financial success. I love the simplicity of free cash flow, FCF in financial terms, because it talks about how much cash is left over. And there's so many things we can do where kind of you put all these kind of soft benefits. And I'm like, no, if I'm happy and I'm generating my target free cash flow, this business is going in the right direction. So I love the simplicity and I love that the two keep each other in check.
And I love talking about happiness. So as I alluded to in the beginning of the show, I'm a huge European football fan. My team is Manchester City. We just won the Premier League and we're going to be playing the FA Cup and the Champions League final. And that makes me happy. So sometimes, much to my coach's chagrin, she'll say, what are you watching football in the middle of the day for? I'm like, because I worked before the match and I work after the match. And I also work on the weekends. I work 7 days, but watching football makes me happy. And I can tell you, doesn't matter if they win or lose, I feel happier and therefore I'm more productive. 100%. Now, I won't sit there, except for Saturday mornings, I won't sit there and watch more than one match at a time. I'm not going to watch football all day long. But here's the thing. I don't watch American football, don't watch basketball, don't watch hockey, don't watch baseball, which I call boring ball, don't watch golf. My sport is football. And the good news is it's always under 2 hours. It's done. There's no timeouts. Just go. And so that makes me happy. And I think when people ask me, how can I become more productive? I said, well, are you happy? Because when you're happier people tend to get more things done and they're more satisfied. So if you're not happy, I encourage the listener to figure out why. Maybe you have to go to a therapist. Maybe you have to go to your mosque, your church, your synagogue and talk to someone and dive in why you're not happy. Because I really truly believe, LaSean, that people who are happy get a lot more done. Do you agree with that?
It's the energy, right? And I think what you've tapped into is when you have the right anchor around happiness, when the work gets sucky or the work gets hard or challenging or, fear, anxiety steps in because you're entering something that's unknown. That positive energy of being happy says, hey, what's the worst that can happen? Hey, I feel great. Hey, all the negative ideals that can kind of wash in your head, that positive energy from being happy helps you kind of push through it. And that inertia from pushing through that, I believe, is the unlock. And so happiness is so, so critical. And just kind of tying it back to me leaving the corporate world, I work with so many fantastic people who were extremely intelligent. And I felt that they were living in fear they were going to get laid off, fear they were going to have some type of disruption in their lifestyle. And as a result, they were almost always anxious and unhappy. And I feel like, number one, that's no way to live. But, I'll give a really short anecdote. If you remember the old movie Office Space from back in the day, years and years ago, the main character is part of a tech company that's going to have some layoffs. And these consultants come in and they say, this guy, he actually doesn't care. And it's all dramatic for a movie, but he ends up, they target him. They say, you're fit for management, right? And that's kind of the joke of the movie. But really there was some truth in that people want to follow leaders, whether it's in a managerial capacity or as just individuals. We are attracted to folks who are moving in confidence. And when you kind of get rid of all the fears, you can move in confidence and you're just going to exude that type of happiness. And so, number one, to kind of what we're talking about, I believe it gives you that inertia to push through the challenging parts of your day. But number two, it attracts people to you because they may still be struggling to find their own happiness. And when they see someone, they want to cross the street and hang out with you.
I love that. Well, this has been an incredibly fast-paced conversation with you, LaSean. You gave a bunch of wisdom and insight. And remember, listener, the point is not just to listen to the show, it's to take action. So LaSean gave you a whole bunch of great ideas, and you can listen to the episode as many times as you want, but please take action as a result of this episode that LaSean generously gave us his time for. So couple more questions for you, sir.
Yeah.
The first question is, if you could go back and talk to your 15-year-old self, knowing what you know now, what would you tell your 15-year-old self?
Love that question. I would tell myself, don't listen to these adults. Most of them are afraid and don't know what they're talking about.
I love it. I love that. And the final question I have for you is, where can we go to find out more about what you're doing in the world?
Sure. Folks can find me on my website. It looks like it's a company, but if you read any of the copy, you'll see it's just me. And that's at cagr.com, cagr.com. You can also find me on Twitter at LaSean, LaSean.
All right. Well, sir, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate you being here.
Fantastic conversation, Mark.
Wait. We're not done yet. Give me just one more minute, please, because I have a huge favor to ask of you on behalf of LaSean and myself. Would you please share this episode with 2 or 3 of your friends? You can just click that share icon on whatever podcast player you're listening to this on and share it with a couple of your friends who need the information you just heard from LaSean Smith right here on the Mr. Productivity Podcast. I want to thank you so much for listening today. Don't forget, anything you want to know about me can be found at MrProductivity.com, MISTER, Mr. productivity.com. Again, thank you for listening. And until next time, stay productive and stay positive.